So Justin, are you?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Sharon.
Can you give the date again of the gathering?
So the next gathering is October 10th.
Thanks so much.
And I will send a follow-up email after this retreat, so probably on Monday or Tuesday, most likely Tuesday, and it will have all the resources we've talked about. It will have all the video recordings from this weekend, and then it will have a list of all of the upcoming offerings where you can register and have the information about dates and times. So we'll make sure we get that to you in a follow-up email.
That's
hello. Okay, I'm spotlighting you all.
Recording in progress.
Khen Rinpoche said, "You all asked me such terrifying questions in the morning that I didn't dare to answer your questions, and so I was so scared to come back, so I was late." You were thinking that I just slept in too long, but that wasn't the case.
Oh, let's say. Yeah, anytime I summon to Namachak.
All right, so I'm going to keep on moving forward.
Ani that developed Loma Tanga so Ramata here, Tajipe, Mamuda de do. Ani chick train da Tony Cote Mamura, Taji machine and exciting those.
And since there are a lot of students here who already have heard a lot of teachings about emptiness, I don't want to go into it. I think, I don't need to go into it to too much of a degree.
I need to do some Tantakache, Megadi, turn dot this one at any and Casereching that he done as a semche one the Tonsonata, Dundum semche, said you. Any semche yapakang, any Dundum then it topic law. Dundum chembike, that ye his in a carsicle. Any de la then Dundum semche, Sigarda.
And so then to come back around to the topic, we were talking about this relative and ultimate aspects of things. And in connection with bodhicitta as well, we talked about conventional or relative bodhicitta. And then there is something called ultimate bodhicitta. And so ultimate bodhicitta is bodhicitta that is also a mind realizing the ultimate truth. Or you could say it is the timeless awareness, or another translation of that term is primordial wisdom, which sees or realizes ultimate truth.
La seda, I don't need to be lochi song saswell.
No.
Don't need to be low. La Anika said the semje the taco so hindo, Nimbota, and when it took jet saria, took jet sava de gangi, and don't need tombi law.
So what I mean by that it is bodhicitta that sees the ultimate reality or realizes ultimate reality or realizes emptiness is that you're already starting with the foundation of having generated bodhicitta, with that commitment to bodhicitta. And then with that as your kind of foundation, as your root, then you realize the mind that realizes emptiness is what we call ultimate bodhicitta.
That only told them that he is one that danger, something at the here, the gala, and Chinosonga, oh, that only sing at the Rigi in Sareva, somebody which it. That Lebanon taste Hako de and out there, that danger, something guni, only to what it.
And then when we talk about that realization, of emptiness, what that might look like, I talked about how that there's two ways of doing that. The first, I said it was through a general kind of a meaning generality or a conceptual manner. And so what that means is today I'm telling you something about, for example, about what emptiness is, and in your mind you gain some kind of general understanding. Oh, emptiness is like this or that. And so it's like by using some kind of logic or reasoning, you're kind of convincing or like coming to an intellectual understanding of what emptiness is.
다 동닝은 좀 도바세 되데 다가서 곰라 땡지니 아니 지 나은게다 같이 냠용데 되는디 젬페 차지니 아니 다지 동니라 다 동니데레 라다 레 곰비톱디고니 아니 뭔데 저런 받지 다 세나다 다단디기도세.
And then the other side of that, so we have a conceptual way of realizing or understanding. The second is to have a direct realization, and that's something that comes about through meditation. And as you're meditating, then your experience of emptiness grows more and more and more to the point where it becomes an actuality for you. It's no longer just an intellectualization or a concept.
동반이 던 통에 디카다나 야운드가라 아니 가서 남중게다 지 군독그라이 디게 담지 참아 데네 가세리 봐 당루드가라 아니 통차 이 시기 차 돼서 담지 데네 야 젬페스 로지니 오텐데스 차 로요레스.
And so as you see the emptiness of all things, then all of those conceptual aspects, coarse aspects of mind dissipate. And then the kind of aspect of realization or the aspect of pure wisdom or pure awareness or timeless awareness, the genuine experience of that increases more and more as that coarse conceptual level of thought dissipates. So it's like an example as if just as the clouds dissipate more and more from the sky, the more and more clearly you see the open sky. So that kind of mind or awareness that I'm talking about there is what we call ultimate bodhicitta.
Okay. 다 같이 노트스나 다 군주 잔조지 샘세 지다 단단 잔조지 샘세지 인도에 자기 도와스.
Okay, so to sum up then we have conventional bodhicitta and then ultimate bodhicitta, right?
다디 니가 되겠다 가르를 펜토디고 그랬어요. 아니 랑다 제 냠독돼서 세고는다 통잡이 이히돼서 담지 야 되니 페리아당 아니 소스게베 직다 잔조 선반남제 샘집이게 아니 레가텔라 마타바 메바 템보 타점보라고 차도 요래.
And so what do these two aspects of bodhicitta help? Like what do they benefit do they bring? So they're both working to increase the power of your experiences and realization. But then they also are, as your power of your relative and ultimate bodhicitta increases, then all of the kind of activities that you would engage in as a bodhisattva, like the 6 perfections and so forth, you become ever more capable at engaging in them. So all of those limitations that make you incapable of fully expressing or fully engaging with those activities, all those limitations can be overcome.
다 가르리세디 빼나 다 군조 그 샘지지부 마도 나다지 줄을 매바이나 티드네 로던데 유는 지야라 빼깔이 요래 빼깔이 차기 요래 세상에서 가르리세디가라 다 파기 요르지라 집다 로바 제고는 가르네 펜도지 제드고데가라 아니 파기니 제 가세레다 로바존다고 나다 거 가르이나 파 가센다고 지셈 페타바이나 데소츠 로바지 통원 람만다 덴들라 때온도 아니 가도그 남바데 나랑 셈나 샤데디가라 아니 티마케 니손 자동 첨범네 아니 반상지 소시 셈디 탕체제 아니 제마타번 로요레 근데 다다 던덤 잔조지 셈게 되는 오데 희송바이나 아니 코지 야 덴디게 강한 것 남바 샤시 야히 로야지니 아니 가서 지고 남칼라베디 라파게 내리지니 놈야 좀 타반다고 지니 코디 야 샘라더니 거면 탐도디 갈라 강한데게 가야 거면 타바고 똥이기 더네 통도디 가야 거 두고 말이데 거면 타바 진짜나 때니 아니 고 간데다지 지나인데 강한데 되니 아 지고 랑잉 고 매바 차지니
And so let me give you an example about what I mean by that. If I only had relative bodhicitta or conventional bodhicitta, then I'm going to have some limitations in how much benefit or how much activity I can do to help others. That's going to be limited. And the reason why is, let's say I'm trying to help someone with whatever kind of activity. I'm trying to help someone. And no matter how much I try to help, they keep returning my help with some negativity or lack of respect, or they're not using what I gave them for what I intended it for, or whatever the case may be. So however much I try and help, they return it with disrespect or something opposite. And so that is going to create, those types of situations are going to create some kind of ups and downs in my mind, like happiness and sadness and so forth. And when that happens 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, however many times it might take, I'm going to get fed up. And I'm not going to be able to do it anymore. I'm going to get exhausted by my failed attempts, or what seemingly failed attempts. And however, if I had the aspect of ultimate bodhicitta, and I know and have recognized the emptiness, then that experience of something seemingly bad or problematic will appear, and just as it appears, as I see its emptiness, it will dissipate. And as it keeps appearing, it dissipates. As it appears, it dissipates. And just like how even if you put oil on your hands and wiped it on your hands, you try and smear it on space, space is unaffected by anything moving within it. And similarly, if you have this mind of ultimate bodhicitta, no matter what kinds of moments of flashes of an experience of this is difficult or this is hard, they dissipate. They can't stain or stick to you. And so that will allow a bodhisattva to continue working without interruption. Now, and so it's just like what we talked about before, like with anger. Anger, even if it appears, if you see its nature, then it just disappears and there's nothing left of it to hold on to. So if you really genuinely see the nature of emptiness, then there are incredible beneficial qualities in that. So that's really helpful just for yourself, isn't it? That you don't get kind of trapped in the mud of difficulties. And so I'm not going to get too much more into that, the aspect of emptiness. And so for those of you who are already in these practices dealing with emptiness, keep on going with your meditations, keep moving with that. For those of you who are new to this, I encourage you to read more, study more, contemplate more, and try and get into some maybe programs or such that would get you into meditation on emptiness. Yeah. And kind of see what you think of it for yourself. And so I don't want any of you to feel like underwhelmed by or disappointed that I didn't talk that much about emptiness, because that wasn't actually the main topic of this weekend's teaching. So now what I'm talking about is trying to connect the dots from what we were talking about yesterday up to now and then moving forward.
베나 가종 메시에데야데 가르레세나 다 산지게 담부 취송도 르다 셈라소바 덴데 데소 탐치테네 여바 예야지 디게 강 델라테네 다요 마레세니 다메바데 데마라바스.
So what I talked about yesterday was the first cycle of teachings of the Buddha, what we call the first turning of the wheel, where the Buddha in those teachings kind of took as a basis that your mind and body exist. They're real in a certain sense. But in that mind-body system, there is no self. So that was the main topic of the first set of the Buddha's teachings.
아니 드렌히야데 다다리 가종제 여세 여바 예야니 헤르야 셈 코란데양 데네디 동일 헤도도 하스.
And so that body, mind, and so forth that we talked about and then the Buddha talked about in the first level of teachings on the basis or on an assumption that they exist. Now, when we moved into today's teaching, which is about the middle turning of the wheel, then we no longer present them as existing in such a way. So the way this is talked about, Dharma language, is in the first cycle of teachings, the Buddha presented or established the selflessness of a person, or the personal selflessness, like the lack of an I or a personal self. And so in the second level of teachings, in the first level, it was taught that even though there is no self, you might still assume that the things that are the basis for your idea of a self, like your mind and your sensations and your body and so forth, you might think those are real. And in the second level of teachings, it's saying, well, even those aren't real. And so in that middle level of teachings, then what was taught is that all phenomena are empty, or they are emptiness, we should say. That is a specific meaning. And so what that means is that if you examine and try and find the thing that you thought truly existed, that you won't find it. And even though you don't find it, because of the interdependent circumstances, there is still an interdependent appearance of something that affects things in the world.
Okay, yeah,
so that's the summary of everything we've talked about up to now.
Yeah,
so now I'm going to talk about the third, or what we call the final turning of the wheel, the third cycle of the Buddha's teachings.
Ani semde nyabrde yaunde kala ani ngaso toni de to bitab digoni ani ta wasarseni deni ngaso tata di lower kuntuguteni semlin debik ani yehiji pagila 다 생각도 좀 고요다. 다디 옷을 되게 차리 마시는 고요스다.
Okay, so speaking of this from the perspective of what one would experience in practice, in meditation, is that you are meditating on emptiness, that emptiness that I just described from the middle turning of the wheel teachings. And when you're doing that, through the power of that meditation on emptiness, then there will be an experience that is described in the teachings as one of luminosity or clear light. And that experience is one where all of those kind of temporary, or what we call adventitious, you could say, or temporary states of mind dissipate. And the real nature, or we call it timeless awareness or primordial wisdom, is what comes forth. And so this third turning of the wheel teachings is spoken about from the perspective of that aspect of timeless awareness or luminosity. Those are kind of synonymous terms in this context.
Okay.
You got it? Is this confusing? Oh, Marisa.
Yeah. Okay.
So we have to talk about so many things today.
Tela ani kasiri wasar sikar ta namju ta ko kasiri topi geteni sem nilung thongwik sem ga rangyin sawa khangyin batela wasar se.
So when we use this word luminosity, we're talking about a mind which is realizing the nature of reality, and in that there is this like aspect of this clear, luminous awareness.
Ta jiko wasar se de inje ta kope de nasoti sem gizoda ure de kope tamje chama de kase je shenge ponge de jire ina yang ta di wasar de la kase de nilo ta to bi dan de to shin di tongni dang de ni ta me di bi ge de ni Namchak Khen Rinpoche.
And when we talk about this luminosity, we're talking about a state of awareness. It's still like aware, knowing, realizing. It is, you could say, it is a state of realizing true reality, or a state which is inseparable from emptiness, but it is what you might call the luminous or the appearing aspect of that mind which is inseparable from an experience of emptiness.
Yeah, that's it. That is Jenny. Any dela da Sanji Gatami Capsulatini. You never keep in Bose.
And in the third turning of the wheel sutras, the teachings of the Buddha, the final cycle of teachings, then that is referred to as the causal ground, the Buddha nature. So generally, you can just think of it as the Buddha nature, but there's an additional word there that is called the causal ground. So anyway, my point is that what we're actually going to be talking about is Buddha nature.
Yeah. That didn't know any same rangi. Tongchani, Chuku, Namchani, Zukugu, the traffic jeche base. That didn't send you young regular. That didn't know my father. Same rangi gangi, Tongchani, Chuku, Namchani, Zuk, Tambita jebase. Traffic, they are Tamba.
Okay, and so to define that Buddha nature, this is a complicated philosophical definition I'm going to give here, but it says that it is the nature of your mind which serves as a cause. And when I say cause, this is another thing like we're going to have to talk about. It's referred to as a cause of separation. That it will cause your nature of your mind to be separated from the stains. So this thing is not causing something to happen, it's causing something else to be removed. So that's why it's called a cause of separation. That from the emptiness side will bring about or will reveal the Dharmakaya, and from the luminous aspect, it will reveal the form bodies of a Buddha. So when I say that from the appearing aspect or the luminous aspect, that it'll create the form bodies. You see, like the physical body of a Buddha there are lots of descriptions of the major and minor auspicious signs and marks of a Buddha's body and so forth. Anyway, there's the appearing aspect or the luminous aspect of the nature of mind or of the Buddha nature will be the cause, you could say, for the display of the body of a Buddha. The physical like, I don't know, the form body is a technical term. 아니 걔네들이 제 tradu기지. 직직 성결.
그래라. 아니 다음 traje 테스콜레 라고도.
라고.
다 traje se 온디가라야 다 직대세 거다. 디 답에나 대안하다 거기서 가대한다지 라고 살고 래 당이만 대해지 따면 거세라 직자제 생긴데라 답에는 데 세혀다 고대우 내지나 다나 곰지 자운드가라 아니니 샘근 나노라 다리세나 이 워서당 다직 연대에서 당기다 Okay,
so let me give you an example of what I mean. And I asked Khen Rinpoche, maybe if you clarified the term cause of separation. He said, okay, let me give you a simple explanation. So let's say I'm a meditator, and I am meditating on this luminosity, and as I'm practicing, the kind of innate qualities of my nature, of my mind, or of my Buddha nature are becoming more and more and more clear, more and more and more manifest.
And
so you might think that those qualities are something which are being newly created by the power of your meditation, but that's not the case.
So
it is rather the case that those qualities were part of our basic ground of being. They are, our basic nature. And we have kind of strayed from our nature, you could say. And we are kind of getting closer back to what we already were, to our original nature. And as we get closer to that through our practice, those innate qualities are just becoming more and more clear to us.
And
so the reason I say that we've strayed from it, or you could even say we've become distant from it, even though it's our nature, what that really means is that there's something obscuring our nature. So what is it that... And so what is it that is obscuring our true nature, or our innate nature, or Buddha nature? It is, from one perspective, you could say it's attachment, aversion, and ignorance, or stupidity. But on an even more subtle level, if we're talking about ordinary mind and the nature of mind, ordinary mind is any state of mind that still has a subject and an object, that there's still a duality. And any state of mind in which there is still a subject-object duality is obscuring us from experiencing our true nature. So as those obscurations are being separated or cleared away, as then that... So as those So as we practice, then more and more of those obscuring factors are removed, and we gain a more and more clear vision of our true nature, which is that nature of emptiness.
아니 영 디트바디 파타링 인데 샘게 연데다 나서 지 산다 똑다다 산지르지 요리히데 대소 담게 쳇사롱 고다
And additionally, as those obscuring factors are dissipated or separated or removed, then all of those innate qualities of Buddhahood. So we talk about a lot of qualities of a Buddha. They have these certain, like these powers, 10 powers, and the different omnisciences and these kind of things. All of those qualities become more and more not activated, more and more manifest for us.
다 덴디게 되는다 돈이 낭차에서 통과돼 아니 다 소소 몽발까지 늦자 예대솔라 되니 낭투비게 당군이 취직고 차야당 속직고 낭투비하게 어다 되게 되니 다고 봐 트라비기 전다지 다데 탐색이 전다지.
And so it is that from the perspective of those two sides that I just said, you'll see the emptiness more clearly and those qualities will become more manifest, that I was saying that this Buddha nature serves as the cause from the emptiness side for your attainment of Dharmakaya, and from the appearing or like luminous side, which is those manifestation of the qualities, that there will appear the form bodies that will allow you as a Buddha to train other beings, to help other beings.
근데 송자다 샘지랑 인세데 고 샘마인바 샘그랑 인지를 고고도 왔어.
And so when we say the nature of mind, we're not talking about mind itself or ordinary mind. We're talking about the true nature of that mind.
다다 가서 그때는 샘지는 뭐 동바 해대 되게 아니 가세리 추고 되네 뭔지 주제당 되네 되게 어사비 차해 되지 되게 아니 속죽고 뭔지 지야게 다저 차자 아니 될때 해대.
And so it is that in that way that we say that that empty aspect of the nature of our mind will manifest as we separate from the obscuring factors, will manifest as Dharmakaya, and the luminous aspect of our Buddha nature will manifest as the form bodies. And it's from that perspective that we call it a cause, or a cause of separation. Is that difficult to understand? Does that make sense?
아니 게 다다 저랑서 추게라고 뭐지 조금에서 그때당 그때 소소지 냠내 쟁이질 자진이 마시에요.
So I'm trying, even just in general, this is difficult to understand, and I'm trying not to use too much complicated Dharma vocabulary, but trying to speak in a way that will connect to those of you who are doing the practices connected with this.
Okay. 야, 라세 땅 얘기디 다 저랑서라지 제땅 게다지 냠내다고 지 잔니 아니 되게 지나 샘그 짠다고 지 간데진이 쪽으로 요가 제게 되는 빼나고 지 마때마 인사
Tenbayin tengi.
나 빼때야 요사.
And so that's just like, kind of an example in terms of like one's own practice and how that would manifest by just perfecting or increasing the power of one's own practice to ripen that to Buddhahood.
Okay. 다 얘기 아니 되니마다 인지 디콜랑 제 아니 다지 해동 아니 다지 데스 배차당 팀바다고 진 틱스지 마 얘기인다스.
So now I want to talk about the same topic that I just talked about, but using some of the ways of explaining this that you'll find in traditional texts.
Okay. 다 베나스 가세고고 다 베나 추롱게 아니게 다른 거니 해바나이 단어쇼가 해바나이 잔천주도 샘제니 추롱게 강아 잡나 다 니게 삼바나이 타도 산지지 공방라 나랑양도 샘제야 거기 생엔데 되네 드비야 요레다 요마레 세 담보께자 디칼라고 요르다.
So now where this discussion is going to lead us, or it does lead us, is okay. previously, I talked about generating bodhicitta, and with that attitude of bodhicitta, I want to liberate myself and all sentient beings from suffering and bring us all to a state of enlightenment. So, is that actually possible to do or not? So, according to Mahayana Buddhism, that is possible. You can do that.
Yeah. Debji yebi jinsai karesede semje ye chani zongde dela sanje ki sawe bi chab seda.
And so the reason why, according to Mahayana, we say that that is possible is because we say that anyone that has a mind, in them, they necessarily also have Buddha nature.
Okay. Ta keja dikal lugu doata.
So that's where this conversation leads us to.
Regi bi chabs.
So it is necessarily the case that if you have a mind, you have Buddha nature.
Tende chedikala ya ta ona ta ya ta sanji ki rex ore dela ta na ledug. Kamyo na leche na
No.
salidam sa jongwan jos. Kame na leche na ngawan ba hi kona says.
So, Nagarjuna, in regards to this, he said, if a rock had gold ore in it, it would make sense to refine that into gold. If the rock did not have gold ore in it, it would be nothing but a cause for fatigue.
This honza be dola seg reyo badam semchen la sanji reyo bichani ane ngonde choji yes leche na yang de ngonde choji yes.
So just like if there is gold ore within a rock, it would make sense to refine it and you could extract gold from it. And similarly, if the Buddha nature exists within the mind streams of sentient beings, then that means that they could manifest that, or they could actually attain Buddhahood.
Ane da di kam menge ji na ane de ko kanga jab na yang na de ngonde choji me se ta de pe.
And so if someone did not have Buddha nature, then even if they worked hard, they wouldn't. It would just be the cause of exhaustion, and there would be no great result from it.
Oh, la se. And deje da di kala da ona da racing de karere se on de ne railan da ba peshu mambu cha chare da. Je dang de railan da ba shu mambu cha chare da.
And so there are a few different terms around Buddha nature. So within that, one is called kind of the lineage, you could say, or the family is a technical term in Buddhism, which is kind of another word for Buddha nature. So there are a lot of different assertions about that.
And benta chino song chi ta racing de candida chile da ya song. Ta chi samaj tang da se.
So think about that for yourself. What do you think about this Buddha nature? What do you think it might be?
Yeah.
아니 기념시 가리송 비우던다.
Ale. Ore ta beni chino song ta racing de candida chile mu song ko du sta sa bang se ko da na. Oh, la se any tende song zan ta race de ta na so nganje bi lo ji ya na. Tene nge tari he ba tere semjirang yi gang hi. Pong bi chani ani drive chuko ngonde chotabe ti dang. Ani nangcha nang bi chani hi ongde zog ju ko sen da peje la so pa ti tan je ngonde che je ki ta gang yin ba na ti de la tene ho tragic smatela like sa.
And so according to our tradition, which we call the Nyingma or early translation school tradition, then the definition is just as I gave you before, that it is the nature of your mind, and from the emptiness aspect, it serves as the result of separation that would bring about the attainment of Dharmakaya. And from the appearing or luminous aspect, it will cause to bring about the manifestation of the form bodies.
Yeah, that's it. Da chi yin da hi ne yang ko to ko jir ko da.
lesser.
다 델라진 더반다만다 몽보요레 이나 다다 치소데 시에야나 랑송 건축도 호레스.
So there are lots of other ways of talking about the Buddha nature, but I'm afraid if I explain them all to you, it's just going to cause confusion, actually.
Justin, may I ask a question?
Tim Gichik.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
This is two parts, and it may just be linguistic in nature. When you talk about the luminous mind or luminosity,
Yeah.
the literal definition is like lit up, right? Like to see
Yes.
light.
Yep.
And this seems to be referring more to a clarity, like something that has been lit up. So I'm just curious as to what I'm misunderstanding there.
It's just a term, but yeah.
Okay, in meditation, am I expecting to have some experience of pure light, or am I expecting to have progressive clarity because the mind's luminous?
Yeah.
And then the other piece has to do with the form bodies as they relate to the appearance of Buddhas. This also, to me, sometimes, will I experience, seeing Buddhas like behind Kempo, or is this seeing the form bodies? Is this a reference to something else that I'm just not connecting?
Tadi pena da wosel sing the tik koran le anchik the wogi ke chara base pena ngato the wosel ngun jury on the wood or chik tongur base. Yamena da chik sempe selbo chaya ke chare the nika de re the karesa.
No sé. 다지 다다 워서 세운데 당가서 샘게 쪼버디 샘제 랑이 아니 가서 다데 낭차세 고는다 당차세 고는다 딜라데 고고래 워서 세딩네
Ani da chik tik koran la wo sel start to say da.
데레데네 세기다라
Ani kongi se na ngato chik ngun de jury on the ngato wood or chik tongo be ke chara besa.
아네 다다지 워서게래 마시 몽보레스라 다다처럼 책제게 다 타지 탑에 짠이요 말이에요. 워서들은 토메 마시 몽보요레스.
So there are all kinds of levels of the experience of what we're calling luminosity here. So to like try and pin it down with one understanding is not really a winning game, I guess you could say. But just in general, to just try and not get stuck on the word too much or the literal meaning of the word, it's just referring to that there is like in the nature of your mind, there's an emptiness aspect and there's an aspect that still knows things, that's still clear, that's still awake, that's still luminous, that there's still, yeah.
너드소나 아니 저거 고한다 오지 레나 워서 세팅인데 나서 배 샘데 띵인진라 곰 띵인진 곰 띵인진 또비고니 샘데마 몽마송 버지 배 당차대 흉청보지 다세는 로잖아 디 당차 대기 때라 다다다디 워서 센데 제땅장이 디칼이 야니 아니 데데네 디 토멘다 빼먹이 로 초그래다 소소 디칼로 토그래.
The general understanding should be that when you're resting in your state of meditative absorption, that there is a state where you will go beyond or you will be out of or removed from mokmason. Oh, yeah. A state which is beyond the states of mental dullness and heaviness and attachment, aversion, ignorance, a state which is very limpid, which is very clear. And then upon that basis, then there are all kinds of levels of attainment, which are different levels, you could say, of attainments of within the subtopic or category of that state of mind that we're calling luminosity.
대양다 제당까지 춘이 똑비 희jel이 야고르마도 제당의 코치 서대와 꼭 나고바 ing에 드리jel라 야고마레스.
But we also need to understand that this is a state of mind that we're calling, or not ordinary mind, this is a state of timeless awareness or a state of wisdom which is realizing the true nature. It's not just a mind that's clear but blankly not understanding anything within it. There is a realization in it.
다이나 다다디 체게 정야데 조 람고니 게자타디 예레 네 다다 히오야데 예이고니 마히도.
And the way that question comes around from your side, and in terms of the experiential side, is asking about it from the perspective of a path and path language. And right now what I'm talking about is a ground, like a foundational principle.
예, 가르치는 가서 이 샘비랑 인생의 간대지를 세네 디칼 따용 거도.
So right now what we're talking about when we talk about Buddha nature is what is the foundational, like fundamental nature of mind.
대지운도 샘텔라양 다지 마 십자치네 마딘 로자디칼라 아니지 고 샘비랑 인된 드리지를 세지 양고지 때려배지 도와시.
So as we go deeper and deeper into mind, then we can reach a point when we can conclusively say the nature of mind is like this. There is something we can kind of confirm or conclude upon.
다다다 추롱송 저 섬로 간디톨 땅거스네 네게 레 요리스 라운디 추롱서 디텔나 저 똑바치 거다.
But
여나 메나 가리나 섬바치.
But I think the point that we need to get to right now is I'm telling you that you have Buddha nature, but I want you to think about that for yourself. I want you to doubt that. I want you to question me about that.
그 대지 똑바치 제나다 다시 여는 점세 가리 요리생이다.
So as if you have a doubt, then you're going to be thinking, okay, well, you said that, but what's the reasoning behind it?
여는 가서 팬도 가리 요리.
And if that did exist, what's the benefit in it? Like, if there were a Buddha nature, then what's the point? What's the benefit?
매는 가서 저 가리 요리.
If it didn't exist, then what fault would there be in that? Or what loss would we incur from that?
근데 유비기지 개상라고 가리 요리.
And what benefit is there? What kind of like profit or benefit do I get by having a Buddha nature?
야, 오케이. 대양 랑게 샘 코랑레 츠사모 땅야레 마도 파사모 땅 마땅 거지. 니 눈이 샘 그지. 다 닝보도 오지만 눈이 직다 봉도 오지 않데 해점나 간지듯이 요호나.
And so this whole discussion is one that you should be turning into your own mind and your own experience, thinking, what is the real essence of my nature? Like deep down, what is this? Why are we talking about this? What is it? And is all this stuff that I'm hearing about that's being explained here, is that true in my experience or not? Is that real for me or not?
Okay. 아, 저놈서 디 돈에다 징알 들어간다고 그 근데 제 탐나 내다다 저놈서 파시 저발 렌제 아니 지망이 만데 해점나 저놈서 사포 라움도 카오레사.
And I think if we move forward in that way with that kind of line of questioning and you kind of approaching the teachings in that way, asking me questions, me answering you, continuing to go through that kind of process, then it's going to become really, really clear to you.
아, 배나 다다디 카시지 다 된다고 멍보지 어다 뭔데거든 뭐 빼먹어 다 나서지 샘세 등에지 여찬이 정도 따지 강아지래 삼바 다 강아 딜 라와지 다 파지 다 도사다니 매 삼바라고 다 청해 빼먹어요랬어
강에 딜을 하고 메스.
나랑게 다독다 고 강아래 마도 강아게 지 맹에 짠이 다고로 샘듯이 요 말에 생겨났다.
And so there are many people who believe that there is no escape. That once you have a mind, that like mind is inherently flawed, and that there is no situation where you will be without troubles.
Yeah, that's also good.
So ask me some questions about this.
You mentioned the concept of Buddha nature just now and asked us to think about that. And for me, what came up was that it feels like it's probably when I think of that term primordial, it's a core. It's what it always was, but we've been socialized. I don't know if I'm correct in this. We've been socialized to respond, to see, to experience life in certain ways.
Tadi jangchuk mare di chik sanji deworship nibo sing de lean chik che nga cho lean chik khandere do rig di khandere do nga cho samatang de suyen basa. Ngarang chik ti nawa lean cho nang do che lean de tab rig singing the ngazo chik yini yinsu rabachi yini ngazo di la chi kare segure shen rawa pe ngazo de bugu chebane so ngazo pama ke dendri chegure chu dendri res pa dendri res rawa chik labne ngazo dag shen la chik kare na chik cha droya da de ni jen la shu droya da de me che kora ni jen na la de ne de ma thong rawa chik cha re ani di yene chik du mane ne chu rawa chik di o rig di insaresa
la se ala ninjing di jima chumbares la se ya ore ta chegi di de yenda yebes.
Anyone else? I want to hear more feedback or questions or doubts.
Well, similarly, can you hear me okay, Justin?
Yeah. Yep.
So similarly, from one perspective, like as an educator, thinking about my experience teaching preschool and primary school, there definitely seems to be like a potentiality in all young children that is, it shines more light on that hypothesis or on that theory, right? Like you can see potentials in children to be little Buddhas at different times as an educator, and it's kind of like across the board. So there does seem to be some, a socialization process that over time affects the child in certain ways where they can become more violent because of afflictive states. I guess the question that I have is if we all have Buddha nature, then we also have to acknowledge that someone capable of, genocide or mass murder also had potential to be a Buddha. And I've heard stories about, the one who came to kill the Buddha. He had killed, 999 people, and he was going to now kill the Buddha.
Yeah.
And he was transformed into, he became enlightened upon his interaction with the Buddha. And so, but that has a certain quality that's very magical and seems not possible to me. So that's my question.
Tadi morangi lapanang yensa res ngagi lopra buku ki gen yensa. Ani kongi tadi penada buku chungshin de tole yanchi ngone chi o chi di gomshi da chi konzo le yanchi region chi gomshi la shu chembo yoma res ani konzo le yanchi tes chi china buku den sanji chocho da yensa resa. Di gomshi le yanchi di pama tang di region ki luksu le yan di shu chembo janyo mara ko yoma res. Tene chi china morangi lapanang yensa resa. Any kong air trewa di karesa na ngato di semchen tamche la rig yopa kelen go chuna. Then me mambo singing chongin rawachi te anchi me tonra mambo singing rawachi le an di sanji ki deworship nimbo yopa rawachi kelen go doasa. Ting e chi kelen le kali kapo yoris. Pena di sanji ki loju ki na le angoli mala di sorting de. Sorting de le anchi me kupcha guchi gu rawachi se ni sanji tao Sega drodi anchik deni tama o sanje jewala deni loma chani chik dra chom chaya di nge chik tis yiche ya de pi kali kapo yorisa. Pe dekpa chimo konzo le ang rig yo paro chik nga di kali kapo yorisa.
La se. La se. 아니 레 다딩에 도시 마시용데 저런 것들이 그토라 똑바 나 상송에 트레인다 산이니라래 봐. 아니 상마소나 아니 저런 양자말 티유스티콜라. 다다지 레이메르 태송이 받대.
Now, so there's going to be more to this discussion, which is going to illuminate this question about if and how and why all beings have Buddha nature. So once we get through those explanations, I want you to tell me if you still have doubts, because we haven't gotten there yet. So, but I'm going to cover that. So, yeah.
Let's say. Aninda, yeah, that negedi, chinoso, mixed try some money. And this home that year tiba chimbola than a rayaba. Then that dribje de, so sanjig song la temba down, ani mutogu ripalateni, then a dribia, then the yore is.
So, it seems like right now maybe we don't have a specific question on that topic, so I want to talk more about the reasons why that we say there's Buddha nature. So we talk about two main ways of talking about this. One is just relying upon scripture, like the Buddha said so, that kind of thing. And the second is through some logical reasoning.
Oh, let's say. Ani tangi dambo aleripa goni maji.
So let me start with the logical reasoning side.
Ani bena riba tambo tela da ka riba somyore dinola zosan kan thocher tan te yini ye mecha da riyo channel jing ta san ni bo jesta de song dan da riba som goni ji dabya bare sela.
So first of all, I want to go through and talk about these three reasons. Or sorry, I want to talk about the logical reasons, but in general there are three logical reasons. And so, I had this open earlier, and now I don't. So I'll just have to translate it on the spot. So, one is, the quote goes, okay, so okay, we'll just go one by one. So the first one is because the the perfectly awakened body has become manifest. That's the first reason. So we'll talk about what that means. So let me give you an example about. So like the Buddha Shakyamuni, our the teacher, our Buddha of our time. So I'm not going to get into all the different qualities that are ascribed to the Buddha, but just take for now as an assumption that the Buddhas have a lot of qualities, okay?
Yeah. That dindawa de any the samaji bingolata, tata de Javatundup lata, Sanjigi yondende, yores.
And so this line of reasoning goes that this Buddha, before he was the Buddha, when he was Prince Siddhartha, he already had all of those qualities of Buddhahood. And the reason why we can say that he already had those qualities of Buddhahood is because they became manifest.
Then
and we can say those qualities became manifest because they were directly perceived by other beings. So we can say in the same way that that rock that we were talking about before, it had gold ore in it because we were able to extract it.
And
so after we have, when we saw the rock before, we couldn't see the gold within it, but now that the gold has become extracted and manifest, we can now say, after having seen it extracted, that the previous rock already had gold in it. Even though at the time, before we extracted it, we couldn't see the gold in it. So the reasoning would go, so the reasoning goes, the Prince Siddhartha, it follows that he already had all of the qualities of enlightenment within him before he became a Buddha, and the reason given is because they became manifest when he became a Buddha.
다당가 소시에데데 산지기 체니마 송규제를 왔다. 디 송규 대당에 연대제 야나 되나지리다. 다 딘다고 찍디 되니 nga semjeng kapsalaya yogo 그래 갈세 치신 드리브 뭔데 주디 갑라 대여바 가서 참 통송하스 다 된다고지.
And so, one of those qualities, let me give you an example of a specific quality, because I was just saying generally the Buddhists have qualities, but let's say the Buddha's quality of his wisdom that sees the true reality of all phenomena. So, that kind of wisdom already existed in his mind stream as an ordinary being, because it became perfectly manifest or fully awake, fully revealed later on. I think Rinpoche di ada le do.
네.
Tadi pe do pa yasa di konsola.
나세. 다디 제 저런소다 산지라 샤자트바 데라 다 된다고지 여봐. 다다지 얘기 누구에서 된대래 상구도에 가는 상구도스.
So what do you think? Do you think that makes sense? Does that prove anything to you? You think that's a dumachi pa yambi jimsen gichi di ngachi me padani chi. Ngarang isam la deni chi chag do la di rachi. Tadi yonten that's a dumachi yana mato. Duchi yana deni ngachi deni chi yucho rola.
네.
Yume.
네. 네, 다그데 거기서 도과지 지지네.
Last. Okay.
So is it like because in this case of the Buddha, the result was that he became enlightened. Therefore, that proves the potentiality for enlightenment existed within him, like a priori, but no, to me it doesn't. That logical argument doesn't make sense necessarily for all beings. And also, you could argue the other way that because, Adolf Hitler was a human being and he ended up the way he was, that every human being therefore has the potential to be Adolf Hitler.
Da di dire da kon sena da di dire vesa da sanje di tiks o che karise gore da jabu dondrob de sanje veres sanje bi jumsen de o kon samaji ngola sanje ge nupa da chi sapon kon yopa da chi de chi shagoro ves dire vesa
어레스 연대인데 여스거다. 이따 산지기 연대인데서 뭐니 잡더도 생길래 여.
lao.
짐생까지 띵건데 지방에서 통송하스.
And so, yes, that's the reason. But I would say instead of saying that the potentiality was there, I'm saying that the qualities were already there. And the reason we can say is because they became manifest. And the reason we can say they became manifest is because they were seen by people or other beings. So we can see those qualities. Ane kongi sena di rikpatan chipa chiga nganzo de semchen tamje Hitler da wachi charungi chi yunten yores karesana Hitler de semchen res ane kali konti mi sengen da wachi Hitler da chabresa. Ane di semchen.
나서 자랑을 했어.
Said actually that's true. We all could become Hitler and we all have that same potential to become Hitler. Actually.
That's fascinating and it makes sense. Thank you.
So if we had the same circumstances and if we had the same power of mind that he developed, we could do that too. But we don't have the power that he had.
I'm wondering
the
how much the karmic aspect enters into this as well.
What dadi legi chik kechara chi yongdo de chik de chik draw yomara.
네. 네, 다다 데 코테스지 야나 디기도 servada. 다다 코직다 리 세딩인데 대양 가서 된 로고 그래서 다다 추기세 돼 덴바레스. kasi kuti mde ma dukya chaya de topse chaya marese de ko kale ko kasere ngamala ko nibachi yore kewa de nyamdi ko semla shukki yore de tsand ma se de ko tawa de bed shukki mochi ko kanga shukki mochi ge de korewa de kala ko wangcha shukki mochi la ane tawa de bed jodoro was.
Yeah, so it is, connected to karma and conditioning and all of that. Like that, it's not as if someone just becomes that powerful and that evil overnight, It's a situation that there was already a lot of circumstances leading in that direction, and those circumstances gathered together and increased his power and authority and all of that kind of stuff. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Then that got in. Ale kong da de message man da.
Yo truly.
Ale da twa message ma. Da di song da da dangbo ale chirong song di gi ten la ta chue ho ye na me na ha ko me. Dangbo di ko la ta ya mo chi che na ani dini ma ti ko len chi ni ma xie na ani chi ka se no dong chi yo re sa.
So I don't know if this has brought any certainty to you to you yet, but that is, one way to go about is to go kind of become clear about each one before you move to the next.
Da pene chi ngaso de chi nyamle chenge te so thamchi la yang chi su so le yang de re hlab de do was. De ten se ko ya te ga ran cha de da. De na wo chi la de ye bi jim sen de singon de chi bi sar. Ko te ga chi ba was.
And so those of you who are practicing the path, and you can see that qualities are arising within you, or they are becoming manifest within you. And so this same logical reasoning applies exactly to your experience. So, you could say that all beings have the qualities that you are attaining through your practice because they are awakening within you, or they are becoming manifest within you.
Oh, there. Da riba tambo de cheni. Any niba de la. Deda cheba yore base. Sanji koran mechigres. Koran la denda uchi chayo sigres. De ina de semji sama de yongu jim sanchi madwa sambi. Masol tanguni topare de yongu yorda.
So the second of these three reasonings is, okay, so you might think, okay, yeah, the Buddha did that, but the Buddha's an exception, or the Buddha's special. There's no reason why all of us could do that too. That's the biggest doubt that most of us probably have.
And
so in that, the reason, or the second reason, is because the nature of reality, or the nature of suchness, is undifferentiated. So we'll explain what that means.
The job tendo gu sem da ngasu gu sem gu rangjing la cheba maybe says yang rangjing le say kogoris.
So what that means is that the nature of mind of Prince Siddhartha and the nature of our minds is exactly the same. There's no difference.
Teje dikala ani sanji le tenda wotene yonden jongrong na ngaso le jongrong maybe jimsai kar se da ko chuni chegre do sem gu rangjing te chado.
Those same qualities were able to manifest in the mind stream of the Buddha, then there's no reason they couldn't manifest in our mind stream, because the nature of our minds is identical. So that's the second of the three reasons.
Ani da Deko tenden da uchi di ni da hako tsasomba ina. Ane re yubisar da. Dene sanji jege da de right de semje tamje la tene kasere da yubisar. Da kasi semje tamje jiba nodukala da de hini bo yubisar se de tamade de sare.
Dingi yabo
re chana le chen ko.
De da tsig de hako gyu. De jumzen de The sumba dinge da ngamani chi yabuko tsumudu. The gas dine chi lagu doda regular se.
De rei bisase onas. Da di chi ondu da da dese gorola da rei bisase da dere. Da semje tamche la kase di dene kase jab tondrup dang and Ravareva.
No.
Then Rava Yebi Jimseka, Semche Tamchi, Sanjiro Imisar. Jimseka, Jabatan of Sanjibisareva.
So the third one is more of a statement than a reason, I guess. It's just saying that, like, because the Buddha got enlightened and the Buddha's nature of mind is the same as our nature of mind, we also have the same capacity for Buddhahood. So the third reason is just because we have the same nature. So the second one is because the nature, there's no distinction in the nature of reality. And the third one is because we have that same nature, you could say.
semje tamje sangjirong yinte re yebishar.
So it's the last reason, if you broke it down as a logical reason, it would say all sentient beings are able to attain Buddhahood because they have the same nature as a Buddha, or because they have Buddha nature. And the second reason kind of showed us why we have Buddha nature, because our nature is no different than a Buddha's nature. So if your nature, or if you have the same nature, if you have Buddha nature, then that means you have the capacity to be enlightened. So first, the first of those reasons is kind of showing that some specific individual attained enlightenment. The second one is showing that all sentient beings are equal in that nature. And the third one is showing that everyone, not just that their nature is, that everyone's nature is the same, but that everyone's nature is actually the Buddha nature. So ultimately what we need to understand by saying that we have Buddha nature, that beings have Buddha nature, is that all of our faults, all of our states of suffering and misunderstanding and so forth are able to be eliminated. And all of the qualities of enlightenment are able to become manifest, or able to expand, you could say. So this is really like, this type of reasoning way of explaining is a way that we would study in a monastic university, by trying to talk about logical reasoning and so forth. So it would be good to have a little discussion just on this point before I move on into a more extensive explanation about Buddha nature.
What I think about is the fact that the Buddha became awakened, and then he began teaching the Dharma. So from the very beginning of Buddhism, the teachings of meditation and other techniques have gone hand in hand with the belief that each person has the Buddha nature. And the proof of Buddha nature, part of the proof comes from the fact that people are able to become enlightened following the techniques of the Buddha, the Dharma that the Buddha taught. So it may be difficult to accept Buddha nature with just these three logical reasons, but when it goes hand in hand with the teachings and the path, it seems like it's been demonstrated that
Tadi chik sanje di sanje bane song kore lian chik di drawa chik tini chik mutini masung drog dusa. Tini da nga tso ki chik di rigyu pi jumsen de ki o sanje de o jabu dundrup di sanje pi charas drawa chik di ki jumsen chik drogo duasa. Te yana da chik chuluk shamba ki chik sanje sheda kemelenken denso ki di jumsen chichina konzo amcho la drogo marisa. Yini yang chik lamka la dro dengan denso ki chik o chik sanje ni song lama shamba denso di lam drup ne deni chik kali kali yunting ngundu jue denso tong dro gore konzo yi chi che gore mato chichina chuluk shamba denso di ripa di sum di chichina amcho dro kapo resa.
저런 세대 대바 도세. 이나양 기 샘그디 소리 제대나 마도 소리 쟁에 때라는 가르먹고 가르치나에 간요 말이 세랄. 문이 때서 리피 진랑지 이나 사모 땅구 차그레스. 그 리피 진랑지 이나 사모 땅구 차그레스. 그 소리기 샘 레데나다 그 가르치나 지간데 요 말았어.
So I think what you're saying is true. Yeah, it would be hard to accept, like, for example, from someone from a different spiritual tradition or something, that if we're using the reason because the Buddha got enlightened, they might not agree with that in the first place. But I think that, for the most part, that kind of rejection or lack of acceptance is coming from one's own particular biases of their own spiritual upbringing. And if someone were to only follow logical reasoning, I think that there's something that actually should be considered, like by anyone, regardless of just having faith in the Buddha.
그 샘때 당가서 리파세나 시럽때 문다바지 여바지 그 가르모 가르치나고 하고 되게 알았어. 길래양 거서.
So, like, for example, the Buddha's teachings, before not that long ago, didn't exist in America. But they have come, and more people get into Buddhism because it's logical, because it makes sense, actually, intellectually. And so it's something that many people are getting more and more into because it makes sense and because the logic of it makes sense. So it is a spiritual tradition which makes use of people's critical thinking and intelligence.
근데 공부시 비게 다지 나서 샘다 신이라서 봤다. 그래서 탐지를 땡지니 팽게레 송반다고 다 팽에야 자차가 논에고 자차 오스지 랍디기 어렸을라다.
Like, for example, the Buddha gave all these kind of techniques, like calm abiding meditation, for example, and said that they will help in this and that way. And amongst the people who really put those into practice, there's a very high percentage who are actually gaining the actual benefits described in the teachings.
그지 샘그디 연된데 통주 여바지 다 대단하서 곰 중에제 인산에 zon데 하고 그랬다데.
So those qualities are things that we can actually see and experience. Like, people who are practicing actually are experiencing those qualities that are described.
대송다 다지 디 소리 제나 되니 그 가르먹고 가르히나다 고치바레사.
And if someone's just speaking from their own kind of biased perspective and rejecting what might be potential in another tradition, then that's just their bias speaking, and there's nothing really to pay much attention to there. But even that exact question that you brought up is discussed in the teachings that talk about these three reasons. And so in those teachings, the way that they try to establish the validity of this is that they first try and establish the Buddha as a what they would call a valid teacher. So they would kind of demonstrate or try to demonstrate the validity or the truth in what he said, in showing that what he said leads to the results that it describes. And if you can gain an understanding and an acceptance of that, then you can understand that you can gain a trust that what he said is valid, something like that.
Yeah.
But that's a really good question, a really good doubt to bring up. So if any of the rest of you have similar doubts, it's really good to bring those up.
Yeah, I don't actually have doubts, but I can see that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So there's actually a lot of debate in the text about that exact topic that you brought up.
Yeah.
Both of us back in India in the monasteries debated on those topics extensively. So like when we first started into our Buddhist studies, we didn't just accept it because it was said so. We had all the doubts and we debated and doubted and went through all of that. Yeah, actually and this is me speaking, not Kempo, in the debate courtyards, I was a monk and went through all this debate study and everything. We're encouraged to reject the Buddha's teachings, like in the debate. Like the other person has to be able to prove through their understanding that what they studied and what they're supposedly believing, that they actually can explain it for themselves. So my job in the debate would be to prove to Khen Rinpoche that Buddha nature doesn't exist, Buddhas don't exist, the Buddha never got enlightened, and he has to be able to stand on his own 2 feet as a debater to prove through his own understanding that the Buddha did become enlightened, that these qualities do become manifest, that this and that, So we're encouraged to bring up all of those doubts. So those kind of questions like you brought up, they really open the doors of our intelligence, our ability to make clear distinctions and clear understandings. And that's a key thing in Buddhism, is that we're not just supposed to be ignorant and shut up and accept things. We're supposed to actually critically think and understand.
All right, thank you very much.
I have a question that ties back to a question from yesterday when we were talking about the no self.
Yeah.
Which I can understand this no self concept, but coming from more of a yogic path with the idea of a true self or a God self, a big self or big S self, I was wondering what that would translate to in Buddhism, and I'm wondering if that is the Buddha nature, or do you feel like there's more explanation available for that?
That's a big question. That dog that nga de chi dog me gi donda gi yapo go to sons kasan che sumanang chen. Ini nganso de tis yoga jankin yinsa ngamani. Ani nganso gi na le chi dog zing chi dog chung chung da chi de yoma res da chi love gi yosa. Dog chembo da chi hla da chi de dog damba da chi de chi nganso de yo res da chi love gi yosa ani de there shik ni bo de la love go revesa.
Ane.
So first, I want to ask you, even if you say that there is like a divine self or a God self or a big self, what is that for you? Is it like a mouse or is it a bird?
As we're having this discussion, I think it's like the Buddha nature, that we all have the potential to fully express our divine nature.
Di dawa cheki danda di sunyo ndu di dag chimbo di peche cheki chek di dewa shek be nimbo dega rang inside di dawa chi samsan dawa chi dusa.
Ane da chimbo di. Ta ma yin ni chirong gu da se dingen da bo ale chi ngun zing chi chen ma to nge lap shi kim da ta chirong da sing din chi re se lap.
So it's hard for me to say or to try and equate what you're asserting as like the big self with Buddha nature if you can't tell me what your idea of the big self is. Or otherwise, like in Buddhism, we just wouldn't ever use that word and we would just say you have Buddha nature. Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Da tamba namkha dendawa seonde ta phaje de namkha dendawo chi ta ya songe de ji semje zo dawo chi che tang be da ja che chong namkha phaje namkha zo dawo chi re da de namkha de la da si lab songe zo da chi ina de ya de chi semje ji yin de zo dawo chi de hi nge ji ore sa
Lesa
da di chi unde da de ge me yi ni de nyama da da wa re sing da da de ge de tra da de so tan nga so hin de so re sa
So there are some Indian traditions that talk about that, and they say there is this like great self that's like the sky, and then Like even like the rivers of the world are the veins in your body, and the trees of the world are your hair, and all that kind of stuff. There are some Indian traditions that talk that way.
This something I saw da chung chung really yours.
And so they say that like we all have a small self, and when we die, our small self dissolves into the big self, or something like that. For example, there's an empty space within this cup, right? If I were to shatter this cup, then the empty space within this cup merges inseparably with the greater space. They say that it's something like that in their texts. But once you're talking about this idea of self, like we're usually the way we talk about it, and the way that it is talked about in those teachings, is that it is like, and the way that that Buddhism kind of denies the existence of a self is that it's not just that there is conventionally a thing that's called self, but there is like a singular, solid, permanent thing that is self. And so it's hard to say that big space like self is a singular thing, because they say that the sun and the moon are your eyes and this and that. Like, so anyway, if you're saying that the sun and the moon and the rivers and the this and that, you're already talking about separate things. So you can no longer say that there is a singularly existing self. So the Buddhism already rejects like the true existence of any self, big, small, whatever you want to call it. Oh, yeah. And we don't even say in Buddhism, when we're talking about Buddha nature, there isn't a Buddha nature that is your nature and is also my nature. Like there is the nature of my mind, there's the nature of your mind, but they're not one thing. They're not different than each other, but they're not the same thing either. So, but when I discover my nature, which is emptiness, and you discover your nature, which is emptiness, because neither of us are finding something, when we say that we don't find at the end of the investigation, we see emptiness. So both of us are seeing, we're having a similar experience. We're both seeing or discovering the not finding of some truly existent self. So there's no difference between what you've seen and I've seen, but they're not the same thing. They're not my... And so it is from that space of emptiness that all of the other aspects still arise in my mind stream, like compassion, love, awareness. All of these things are happening within the space of emptiness. And that happens the same for you. So there's no difference between the way that happens. And so that's the point upon which we come to, like what I was just saying, where you seek and don't find a truly existing mind or self or whatever it is, and yet within that space of emptiness, all of those qualities of mind, of love, compassion, wisdom, and so forth still appear. So that is that even as things are empty, they still appear. Even as they are appearing, they're still empty. So that's that union of appearance and emptiness. It's not like we're saying that there is some real thing that truly exists that's the same, that you and I are the same in.
What about the gold?
What about the gold?
디체라.
들어와라. 지기 단다 승부디 디치 투몽도 요바다 요마라와라.
아레레레. 투몽도 되네.
따디 세르디 카르레사.
알라.
살레드라마 세르유지스테 세겐데 디치. 따 세르디 치바라바사. 페디 치 돌라 세르 요발레 데니. 나초디 치.
So
the fact that, this being and that being both have the seed of enlightenment within them, they're the same in that they both have the seed, right? So they're similar in that they both are of the same type. But if you were saying that they are the same gold, then the gold that was extracted from this rock, when you extracted it, it should have extracted itself from this rock too, but that doesn't happen, does it? So it's like that.
Yeah, and then this song oh yeah. Then that's another that Tenge data ridi ripate da wochi chen tenge te sijik dama te maimba te kashiti ma shege iseral.
So I've given you those reasons, but now I want to talk about this from a different side.
Ani dende somtang kala da zo naso data de chik sanji ge tinge katong dang ma chen ba de nyamne che de zo tongni ki thongni ma she de gara.
So for those of you For those of you who have already received meditation teachings from me about emptiness, so there are quite a few of you who have already gone through some Vipassana program with me, then what we were talking about there and what you've been meditating on specifically was about emptiness. So when we're talking about emptiness here, or like if you want to connect that to this, we're talking about the emptiness aspect of Buddha nature.
So
there are lots of logical reasons and ways of analyzing that will lead us to understanding emptiness, right? So in this section, what we're talking about now, the third turning of the wheel, these Buddha nature teachings, we're talking about if you were in this state of meditating on emptiness, then there are these qualities which appear or come about as the appearing or luminous aspect of Buddha nature.
쳔바데서 쩌르츠와 니종데 톱다 응시다 데니 직다 가세직 샘그 나노라다 직 연데 요세 디기다데서 참아 양은데 결혼 고여라 다 디기 통니 히온데 디디히니 모다 가세 남착 통니 히디고다.
And so as we're practicing in that way, then that all these qualities, which are aspects of the appearing aspect of your Buddha nature, so coming to realize or understand things that you had not yet realized, perfecting your realization of things that you've already known, and so forth, gaining all of the powers, clairvoyances, and so forth, all of the qualities that are ascribed to Buddhahood, and gradually become more and more manifest. All of that is what's encompassed by the teachings on Buddha nature.
Oh, this is here. Da kachin di ni tse dong du cha so so ni here de hor ma do da ke here de hores.
And so when we talk about those two sides, like the emptiness side and the appearing side, we're talking about two different aspects of one thing.
Da de song dang so de sti ka se nyamlen jing en so ga di da de hing bo se de sti ma de la pa de pe kar chmo ji cha de yore.
So for someone who is on the path of practice, really coming to a good understanding or good establishing what the Buddha nature is very important. So that's just a little summary to bring together those two sides of appearance and emptiness.
Yeah. That's it. They call it young Jessica Cosopeta, Mount Argument.
So if I bring up another topic, is it going to be too much? Is it going to be overwhelming for today?
Justin, there are still a couple of questions in the chat about Buddha nature. Is it okay to ask those now?
Yeah.
So Chris
ahead.
Chris had a question. When and if appropriate, if all sentient beings have an inherent Buddha nature, why does it take so many eons and so much effort to reveal? Why do we cycle among the different incarnations so long and easily?
Da nga zo rig de yuna, simchen tamche la rig de yuna. Da khari chini nga zo de chi khora da chi to lo tondra mambo da chi kapa mambo la chi khali japne da chi ngundu joya la ya chi pe khali japwe da chi khari resa.
Ale rig de yuna.
Ngundu joya la khali japwe khari resa da chi lo tondra mambo kapa mambo da chi.
Ale leo sanji kita jing zeba de kase.
Da nga zo la ya.
Lamdu bela sikwa.
Nga zo la ya da chi da khari na chi da. Da khari chini drip de gore sta chi la gore do.
Ale la se. Oh, they didn't get the Yoris.
Oh,
Pena Cassere Drupatilla Yanta, Chechong Yoris. Drupatilla Chechong Pimas Yoris. Pena Jinga Sope, some gelatin, some Cherry Bugs, Yevanagi, Pache de Lotonta, Reset de Zambele Nimatsan, Mashavache, and develop the 강차다 띠차다 뭐뭐 차이가 서도
가짜도 비자서
다 강을 잠블렌 참아베
강을
첨부지 차 가르세디 목바디 망타 목바 희분 택기니 다 니마 주님 마 샤바지 되는지 차에서리스 되는지 얘기도 왔어
now so this can be different for different beings because of the intensity of their obscurations. And so, it's kind of like how scientists say that like the world goes through different ages, and when there's an age where there's more and more, fog or darkness in the world, then it becomes colder and we have an ice age and so forth. And in that circumstance, like of an ice age, it's not as if the sun isn't shining. It's just that it's so obscured by so many clouds and so much fog and so forth that it doesn't actually like heat the earth. And then there's no conditions like a powerful wind or so forth to clear away those clouds and reveal or to have a direct, shining forth of the sun.
Ako nam yegi di driba di papa chik tene yandu di kala ane ko nima teka rungo di chore ane kangcha teka rang shibares.
And then at a certain point when those obscuring clouds dissipate, then the sun, which was always shining the whole time, will finally become manifest and all the ice will melt.
Ta tenda uchi nga so yang ko gom jingwe ngula tende yore ko kashi chi te isi tisu yunru mboda chi ngodo nge tende. Kashi chi shiwe mongpo chi mungo nge. Kare ina ko chi
And so then some, people who meditate, some meditators will take a very long time for them to start to see progress, for qualities to start to come forth. And some will start to show those qualities very soon because of the intensity of their obscurations.
Ale,
penangazo de chik regiona, tangazo karichini chik monde yoredaji.
Ale, tambuni digona, tambuni regiona karitin mondi kores.
So I just followed up to say, and then in connection with that question, why don't you talk about, well, if we have Buddha nature, then why are we ignorant of that? Why are we obscured in the first place?
Di chekenda uchireta. Rei yu jiang da ko rei singen de nga so ye zang le ya ge yor da ye zang le ya ge yor ye de ko gare ina jong rong zam re ma tu je ge jong cha ba ji he ge me se ba jong cha ba ji he nen di ba de yong ku yor ye sen de ko jong rong zam he re ko gare ina ya de ba ina yong rong ka se hi na hi rong ka se re ji ma dam na de rong yong ge je le nge he ho ba.
So one thing we need to understand when we talk about a Buddha nature is that it was just the ground, the basic fabric, you could say. And in that ground, where the discussion of like awareness or unawareness or realization and not realization doesn't even exist. So it's only, that is a potentiality for anything to happen. Awareness, unawareness, obscuration, anything.
Tati ko Mongol sam tango kumare pene ngasu semla kare ina chi chungrong jing do da an tegarang re ko ta de chi kong thona thorong do reba deba chena cherong do kare ina ko cherong sam hi do korang tambo dini dhamma sam chi do was.
And so it's kind of the same, like you can understand this in your current state of mind. Your current state of mind can become anything. Your nature or your mind right now could become angry. Or it can become faithful. So it can become anything, and it's because it's not bound to be one thing that it could become anything. So it's like I was... Oh, yeah. It's like the question before, who was talking about being an elementary school teacher and so forth. Like children's minds are really movable, they're really workable, like they're not stuck in one way. And then whatever kind of conditions or conditioning they meet with, their minds will shift in that direction. And so if you talk about this lineage, you could say, or family, or this Buddha nature, those are all kind of synonymous terms that are used in the Buddha nature teachings. If you use the big name Buddha nature, it sounds like some big thing up there in the sky, but if you talk about it in terms of your mind, it is that a capacity to become anything on one level. That's also a really good question, though.
Geraldine, did you want to ask your question?
Yes, please. Thank you so much, Rinpoche, for your teaching, so helpful, so clear. I have a question about the two aspects of the Buddha nature, emptiness and appearance. So concerning the aspect of appearance, do we refer to the aspect of the pure kayas and wisdom of the Buddha nature? Or is it also our actual karmic visions? Can we consider that our actual karmic visions, appearances, are also part of our Buddha nature? I don't know if you understand my question.
Yeah,
I don't speak very well English.
When you say karmic visions, do you mean our ordinary perceptions, like impure perceptions?
Yes, yes. What we perceive, or is it only the pure kayas and wisdom that we can see in Toggle or so on?
I understand. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Ani kiram sing answer ge ta rig de la yan chik nangcha tang thongcha ni thone chik she gorwala nangcha ki thone nganso de kutan yishi gi yunten chikpo gi chik de keche yongorbe ya nganso madakwa gi nawa madak bi nawa ra chik nganso danda legi nawa ra chik le yan chik thame wa ra chik legi nawa den so yang rigi nangcha ki thone dreshe jawe yorbe sa.
Yeah.
So you asked a very tough question.
Oh, sorry.
So right now I'm trying to speak specifically just from a sutra perspective.
gom jibige da ji tongni de yer me chibige da same nangcha wasar dig to the go res.
And in that context, in the sutra context, when we're talking about the luminous or appearing aspect of Buddha nature, then we're talking about what is experienced as this luminosity in the experience of, or which is inseparable from, the meditation on emptiness.
So
let me explain a little bit, or else this is going to be very difficult to understand.
Sanji ja tuji le shan jagri singen dawo. Dene dewa ta tendo da ji kasere di. Kariko sanji ja ni chu nye thugre singen so dawo. Shinkan ja la tuji le dro thugre singen. Di namje ba korong sem korong ge yan den ge ding la. Ta da ko pe sanji ja ngun song korong jin ja yan dawo de ji thugu do de. Ta di ge chani. Ta di yun den de sani ba la de ni tong tha cha. Then cha bum cha cha ni den ri ge den ke sem je ta phag yuen den ge den na wa ge ti thong ni pe den nang cha ti zo hie de go ra de.
And so, for example, what I mean by that appearing aspect here particularly is, for example, in the teachings they say when a person who's meditating on emptiness reaches what we call the first bodhisattva level, which is the first moment of direct realization of emptiness. In that experience of emptiness, they say that that person directly meets with, or can directly meet with, in a single instant, 100 Buddhas, receive teachings from 100 Buddhas, travel to 100 Buddhas' pure realms. On the second bodhisattva level, 1,000 of those. On the third, 10,000. The fourth, like 100,000, and so forth. So we're talking about some kind of like, from that perspective, in the sutra level, what we're talking about when we talk about the appearing aspect of Buddha nature.
Ani pere ta nga so ta sam ge ta de hi se ko mare ta de yan chen cha de. Chen cha cha ni ta nga so le ji ji ta ji dang ko sem na wa zam ma du yong tu da. Ta di ge de chen cha de ge ta pe de chu ge ni long da wo de je sap to ne pan sam je ko ngon som ge ta nga so hie de ta yi ge ge dong ni je hie de la so ba ta. 다리 찍고 나서 봐 해대야 돼서 다 로이 파티가 이쪽으로 차야 되게 된다고 많이 봐 원성거로 채통에 샘라 돼가서 야 지도야 보러 봤어.
And so when we're discussing this, we're talking about this this aspect of wisdom or of knowledge of emptiness and of the true nature. So as one is meditating, as one is gaining a more and more clear vision of the true nature of phenomena, then they will go beyond our conceptual, mentally created idea of what a Buddha is or what the nature of reality is, until it's a direct experience, an actual direct experience, and it's no longer part of just a thought process or a conceptual process.
ngân hi se ji yong jo da ngân hi de ko de ngân hi chung chung je ni zong de tar de ni ko drba me be da sa kwa ta ji se bi ge da ka se ri ngân hi lan ro to mo was.
And another aspect of this is that as our mind becomes more and more clear, as our vision of reality becomes more and more pure, then we can gain what are called clairvoyances, and those start off as very small experiences and can gain in power until we attain what are called the uncontaminated, unstained, or unobscured clairvoyance.
Ta kachin tela so ta sem ge yen den no la ta pe de ta hie zo krom me ba den de ta de ta de so ta ting yin ji go se ta den de mo bu se ta de ta de so ta de li tu sa me ba chan do du ani sang ji se ma do ji sang ji sing yin de nga ma ni ji ye de so no hie hye ma ko
La
sanji se nga ma ni ji ka se de le ji ye re se kan zo mo zo ya ma yin ba pe na ka za ji pe ja bu don do ji ko me ji de de ka nga jam ni de ko sang gu ye de ta ta be de thong ni ta de ni cha do ji ba ji hie de ko.
And so then, anyway, like someone's, these qualities of enlightenment, the qualities of this appearing aspect of Buddha nature, the qualities of enlightenment are limitless for us to, it's impossible for us to describe them all. But anyway, this is all happening from the opening of, the technical term is the opening of the gates of meditative concentration. And so when those qualities become completely perfected, then one attains Buddhahood. So the Buddha isn't just some historical figure that we point to 2,600 years ago. It's, anyone who develops themselves through this process and fully perfects, fully reveals or manifests all of these qualities of enlightenment, that is what is a Buddha.
다 같이 나서 샘고 다지 샘세고나 간다 낭차가 또 비고니다 직단 나와 다 저가세 조조다 대 차니다 해되어다 노로 이야기는 대해고.
So speaking specifically from the sutra tradition, then when we're talking about the appearing aspect of Buddha nature, then that's what we're talking about. All of these qualities that continue to manifest as one continues on the path, as having this direct experience of reality until that experience is completely perfected. So that's one part of my answer. So the second part of the answer is that our ordinary perceptions, our ordinary experiences, for example, of our sense faculties, the things that we see with our eyes, hear with our ears, smell with our noses, and so forth, those are what we would call contaminated aspects or contaminated aspects of the appearance of Buddha nature, or the contaminated appearing aspect of Buddha nature. So what I was describing before with a being who has made it to the direct experience of reality is an uncontaminated, those visions or those aspects of the qualities of enlightenment are the uncontaminated appearing aspects of Buddha nature. So it's kind of like as many clouds as come into the sky during the daytime, it doesn't make it pitch black. There is still some appearance of light in the sky. It's like that.
Because I thought there was a distinction to do from the Dzogchen perspective. We make a distinction between our actual perceptions that comes from the alaya.
Yeah.
Alaya Vijnana sometimes, and the pure vision like we find in the Churni Bardo or Tegal practice, the pure vision of Rigpa. I thought there's a distinction between the source of these different appearances. Is it correct to see like this or?
Nganzo namjun dene che karse gore madakpe nawa dawa che de kunshi ge che nawa dawa che kunshi namshi ge nawa dawa che de labi do chik de ane de nganzo de pena da chik dakpe nawa dawa che yan chuni bardo ge nawa yan thoga ge nawa dawa chik den so ge chik o chik jungkhung dawa chik de chik loka revesa de nawa ge
ane
jumsa ge shi dawa chik loka revesa
nase nawa jumsa ge ya te kan se do wala nawa jumsa ge yesena benada
ta nganzo de chik
ko na kan de ko do
I don't exactly understand the distinction that you're trying to make or that you're asking about.
That you don't check in this one, you can attack same Nawaji the Revas.
Lao.
Teleco Nawa Karishana, same Nawaji the Res. This is on Nawaji Paris, Senonji Res. The Senon de Condamada, you're the same day again. Jen Damadan tip of the good, Nawan Damada Revas.
The Morangi chick the Dagbe Nawatan chick the Tugel in our little same in our mother. Damoran take out the chick Zogin, which loves something.
Ah, let's say. I didn't touch wrong with the city, the Zogchen that the Hekona. The young day sitting as so Trumtag and non the young takes in Mandava, he go yours. That then legal judge at the young
So one problem here is that if you want to bring this up from the Dzogchen perspective, then you're speaking from a different perspective, and that explanation can't be directly applied to this explanation.
Okay, thank you.
So right now we're talking about the general presentation from the Mahayana perspective.
Yes, thank you very much.
And so these teachings right now become like a common teaching or a common kind of root for both the basic understandings of the sutra and tantric traditions. But once you go into the tantric traditions, then there are many different ways of explaining things and different even levels of understanding within that, and different pith instruction lineages for ways to talk about those things. But what I'm trying to talk about here is primarily what the Buddha taught in the sutras about this topic.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Rinpoche.
Justin, we're at time.
Oh, that tutu semsona.
Oh, lase. Lase, any day song da chenamba jima trate sugu. Pache chenamba la de si Japan 2 euro nge sambudu. Chenamba trachi yaku. Mato any ngega de ma gona pe mongda chitandro. Tense here yagona chikalekabonda chi. Tende yungudu.
So I think this session went well. It's great for people to ask questions and clear some things up, because otherwise if I just sit here and say whatever comes to mind, I feel like it'll make the discussion quite complicated and difficult. So, yeah.
That they tamchela the nekaze make sound and so super land the sabo tondo the becha and don't the
So in the traditional texts, they go into really profound explanations, and then they talk about lots of different ways that other people might assert the same position. And that can get complicated, but it's actually really helpful to study in that way, because a lot of us, our minds try and go in those directions. Well, maybe it's like this, or maybe it's like that. So if you read the assertions of other philosophies and other traditions, then you can kind of see what's the fault, or what would be the mistake if I thought it was this way or that way. What's the benefit in thinking this way? And so it's actually very helpful in gaining a clarity of understanding to go through that.
Oh, let's say, see you tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
What are these texts called? The main text on this topic is called the Uttara Tantra. And I'll send a link tomorrow, but there's a great book in English, a free downloadable PDF from Dzongtsar Khyentse Rinpoche on the Uttara Tantra. But it's quite a complicated text, but it's really good use of time if you wanted to study it. But there's a free downloadable PDF on the Siddhartha's Intent website of the Uttara Tantra. Yeah. All right, so we'll say a little dedication.
Hold it.
Sonamde tamche zepa nye tomne nyepe dranam pamche chinche ga nache bala trupa yisipe tsole drowa drowa jo jambo pawo jitar chemba tang kundo sambo tayan deshin de da kungi jesu dalo kewa de da tamche rabdu jewa tamche ji ngowa gana chotu ngapa de dagi gewe zawa de kunjan zambo chuche rabdu ngowa ji.
Okay.
There's also, if you wanted to check out sometime, the Awam Garden of 1000 Buddhas YouTube page has a very good lecture from Khen Rinpoche on emptiness, where he talks extensively about the emptiness is form, form is emptiness, form is not other than emptiness, emptiness is not other than form, that explanation. And also there's another whole lecture about Buddha nature on that YouTube page, so you can check those out too.
Justin, may we offer Khenpo's long life prayer?
Oh yeah, sure. Are you going to read it in English or in Tibetan?
I can read it in English, and I just shared it in the chat.
Okay.
For those of you who'd like to read it too.
Awesome.
So, Om Swasti. Through the blessing power of the three jewels and three roots, you attain mastery of speech as the illuminating sun of exposition and are adorned with the 9 modes of virtue and excellence. May you live long and according to your aspiration, accomplish your twofold aim for the teachings and for beings.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks all. Thank you.
Thank you all. See you tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow.
Good night.